There is something deeply painful about watching your son become one of the most recognized men in the world, and still wondering whether anyone truly loves him for who he is, when the cameras disappear. I do not think most people understand that kind of fear. They think success protects a person from heartbreak. They think money somehow makes loneliness easier, but sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes it builds walls so high around a person that nobody reaches their real heart anymore. And that is why the conversation I had with Elon recently stayed in my mind long after the night ended. It was very late. The house had become quiet in that soft way it only does after midnight. No meetings, no interviews, no noise. Just a mother and her son sitting together while the world outside kept moving without us. I remember looking at him carefully because mothers always notice when something inside their child has shifted emotionally. Even when our children are grown, we still hear the heaviness in their silence. Before I tell you what happened that night, I want to ask you something gently. If these conversations about love, family, and the emotional lives of our children touch your heart, then quietly like this video and subscribe so we can continue having these late night talks together. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there right now, because I always imagine women listening from different corners of the world while the rest of the house sleeps. And if you know another woman who still believes real love matters, share this conversation with her too. Sometimes one honest story can comfort a lonely heart more than we realize. You know, dear, people often look at Elon and only see power. They see intelligence, ambition, money, controversy, success. But mothers do not look at their sons the way the world does. We remember the child before the pressure arrived. I still remember Elon as a quiet little boy who would disappear into his thoughts for hours. Even then, there was something unusual about him. He did not think like other children. Sometimes I would watch him sitting silently, completely lost inside his own mind, and I would wonder what kind of future awaited him. But no mother imagines the emotional cost greatness can bring. As women get older, I think we begin understanding love differently. When we are younger, we are often distracted by charm, attention, excitement, chemistry, but life teaches us painful lessons. Eventually we realize peace matters more than performance. A calm heart matters more than dramatic passion. And after all these years, after watching relationships rise and fall around me, I came to understand something very clearly. The right woman for a man is not always the loudest woman in the room. Sometimes she is simply the one who makes his soul feel safe. Have you ever loved someone who carried heavy emotional pressure? A man who looked strong to everyone else but quietly exhausted himself, trying to hold everything together. Those men are difficult to love sometimes, because they rarely know how to rest emotionally. Their minds never stop moving, their responsibilities never disappear, and the world keeps demanding more from them every single day. That is exactly why I worried about Elon for years. Not because I doubted his intelligence, not because I doubted his future. I worried because emotionally intense men often attract emotionally complicated relationships. The world becomes fascinated by them. People chase their attention. But genuine love becomes harder to recognize when you spend years surrounded by admiration, expectations and noise. There were moments when I would watch him during family dinners and notice something nobody else seemed to notice. Even surrounded by people, he sometimes looked emotionally far away. Mothers can see loneliness even when it hides behind confidence. We can hear sadness hidden inside casual conversation, and every time I noticed it, my heart would quietly ache. I used to ask myself constantly, what kind of woman could truly love a man like my son? Not his success, not his influence, not his name. Him, the real man underneath all the headlines. Because the truth is, powerful men are often deeply tired men. The world assumes they want admiration most, but many of them secretly crave softness. A place where they do not have to perform constantly. A woman who brings emotional peace instead of emotional chaos. And let me tell you something honestly, dear woman. Emotional peace is one of the rarest forms of love now. People chase stimulation constantly, attention, validation, excitement, but very few people know how to create emotional safety anymore. Very few people know how to sit beside another human being quietly and simply make life feel lighter. That night, Elon looked different somehow. Calmer, thoughtful. There was a softness in him I had not seen for a long time. Mothers notice these things immediately. I remember pouring tea slowly while studying his face, wondering what was happening inside his heart. Then suddenly, after a long silence, he looked at me and smiled in this quiet, almost nervous way. And dear, when your son rarely speaks about love, Even one small sentence becomes unforgettable. He said, "Mum, I think I finally know the kind of woman I want to marry." I cannot fully explain the feeling that passed through me at that moment. Relief, curiosity, hope, fear, all mixed together inside my chest at once. Because every mother wants her son to find love, but we also know how deeply the wrong love can wound a person. I did not interrupt him immediately, I simply listened, and as he continued speaking, I realized something important had changed inside him. For the first time in years, he was not describing beauty, excitement, status, or attraction. He was describing emotional peace. Do you know how rare that is? Especially for a man who spent most of his life chasing impossible things. He told me he no longer cared about being impressed constantly. He no longer wanted drama, confusion, emotional games, or relationships that felt unstable. He said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. He said, "I want a woman who feels like home." And dear woman, the moment he said those words, I knew my son was finally understanding what love truly means. When Elon said those words, "I want a woman who feels like home," I felt something inside me become very still, not emotional in a dramatic way. It was quieter than that. The kind of feeling a mother gets when she realizes her child is finally beginning to understand life beyond ambition. Because for so many years, I watched my son chase impossible things with unbelievable determination. Yet, I also watched him struggle with something far more human, emotional peace. And maybe you understand this too, dear woman. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who secretly crave tenderness the most. Not because they are weak, but because they spend their entire lives carrying pressure nobody else can fully see. The world looks at men like Elon and assumes they are emotionally untouchable. But success does not remove human loneliness. If anything, it often deepens it. I remember leaning back in my chair that night, listening carefully while he spoke. There was no performance in his voice anymore, no arrogance, no attempt to sound impressive, just honesty, raw honesty, and mothers wait years for moments like that with their sons. Especially sons who have spent most of their lives protecting their inner world from everyone around them. He told me something that stayed in my heart afterward. He said he was tired of relationships that felt emotionally unstable, tired of trying to guess how someone felt, tired of emotional games, misunderstandings, distance, and constant tension. He said when a man spends all day solving enormous problems, the last thing he wants to come home to is emotional chaos. And dear, I think many women need to hear this too. There is a difference between intensity and love. Some people confuse emotional confusion with passion. They believe love must always feel dramatic to feel meaningful. But real love, lasting love, often feels calm, safe, predictable in the most beautiful way. It allows your nervous system to rest, instead of constantly preparing for emotional pain. Have you ever experienced that kind of love? The kind where you do not feel anxious all the time. The kind where silence feels comfortable instead of frightening. I think many women spend years accepting emotional inconsistency because they mistake it for chemistry. But chemistry alone cannot carry a relationship through life's difficult seasons. At one point during our conversation, Elon became very quiet again. He stared down at his tea for a long moment before speaking. And when he finally did, his voice sounded softer than I had heard in years. He said, "Mum, I think I spent too much time choosing women who challenged me intellectually, but not enough time asking whether they brought peace into my life." That sentence broke my heart a little, because age teaches us something painful about love. Intelligence matters, attraction matters, excitement matters, but emotional safety matters more than all of them once life becomes difficult. And life always becomes difficult eventually. One thing women learn by 50 or 60 is that relationships are tested less during beautiful moments, and more during exhausting ones. Illness, stress, failure, sleepless nights, emotional burnout. That is where real love reveals itself. Not during vacations or parties, or romantic photographs. Real love reveals itself in ordinary moments, when two people are emotionally tired and still choose kindness toward each other. I looked at my son while he spoke, and suddenly I no longer saw the billionaire the world talks about every day. I saw a man emotionally exhausted from carrying responsibility for too long, a man who wanted somewhere safe to place his heart. And honestly, dear woman, isn't that what all of us want eventually? Not perfection, not fantasy, not endless excitement, just emotional rest. I asked him carefully, "Then what kind of woman do you think brings you peace?" And the answer surprised me more than I expected. He did not talk about appearance first. He did not mention beauty, fame, intelligence, or social status. Instead, he smiled slightly and said, "A woman who is emotionally calm. A woman who listens without immediately judging. Someone who makes difficult days feel lighter instead of heavier." The older I get, the more I realize how rare that quality truly is. Life makes many people emotionally hard. Pain changes people, betrayal changes people, disappointment changes people, and sometimes women become so used to protecting themselves that softness slowly disappears from their relationships altogether. But softness is powerful, never underestimate that. A gentle woman can heal parts of a man the world never even notices are wounded. And before anyone misunderstands me, gentleness does not mean weakness. Some of the strongest women I have ever known were deeply feminine, emotionally warm, and incredibly calm under pressure. They did not create chaos to feel important. They created peace, because they understood how valuable it was. I think that is what Elon finally started understanding too. He spoke differently that night, slower, more reflective, almost like a man who had grown tired of chasing surface-level connection. He told me he wanted someone who cared about family deeply, someone who understood loyalty, someone who did not disappear emotionally the moment life became stressful. Then he laughed quietly, and said something that made me smile. He said, "Mum, I think I finally realized I don't need a woman who competes with my life. I need one who shares it peacefully." Do you know how emotionally mature a person must become before understanding that? Because younger people often chase relationships that feed their ego. Older souls begin searching for relationships that protect their peace. And perhaps that is why so many women over 50 understand love more deeply than younger women sometimes do. We have already lived through disappointment. We know what emotional instability costs a person over time. We know how draining it feels to constantly wonder where you stand with someone. By this point in the conversation, I could feel my heart becoming emotional in a way I had not expected. Not because my son wanted marriage, but because I realized he was finally seeing love through a wiser lens. And then, after another long silence, he looked at me carefully and said something that completely changed the direction of our conversation. He told me there was already someone he could not stop thinking about. The moment Elon admitted there was already someone on his mind, I felt my heart pause for a second, not because I was shocked that a man could fall in love. No mother is surprised by that, but because of the way he said it. Slowly, carefully, almost protectively, like a man holding something fragile in his hands for the very first time in years. And dear woman, when emotionally guarded men begin speaking gently about someone, you pay attention. I remember watching his face closely while he stared out toward the window. The room had become so quiet by then that even the smallest pause between words felt meaningful. There was no arrogance in him anymore. No desire to impress anyone, just honesty. Deep, exhausted honesty. He told me he had spent years meeting extraordinary people, intelligent people, beautiful people, ambitious people, women who fascinated rooms the moment they walked into them. But somewhere along the way, he realized fascination and peace are not the same thing. That sentence stayed with me, because how many women spend half their lives trying to become unforgettable, while forgetting that emotional safety is what people remember most in the end. You can impress someone temporarily with beauty, charm, status, confidence, but peace changes a person's life. I asked him quietly, what makes this woman different? And he smiled in this small, almost shy way that instantly reminded me of the little boy he used to be before the world hardened him. Mothers notice those tiny expressions immediately. Sometimes our sons become children again for only a few seconds before returning to the heavy roles life demands from them. He said, "She listens carefully." Such a simple answer. Not she's perfect. Not she's stunning. Not she's brilliant. He said she listens carefully. And dear, I nearly cried hearing that. Do you know why? Because truly listening to someone has become incredibly rare now. Most people listen only long enough to respond. Very few people listen to understand another human soul, especially a complicated soul, especially a tired soul. Elon told me this woman never rushed him emotionally. Never forced conversations before he was ready, never turned vulnerable moments into weapons later during arguments. He said when he spoke to her, he felt calmer afterward instead of more exhausted. That is love, not confusion, not emotional unpredictability, not constantly testing each other. Love should feel like your heart can finally unclench, and maybe some woman listening to me right now needs to hear this deeply. If somebody consistently leaves you emotionally drained, anxious, insecure, or mentally exhausted, That is not the great love story you keep trying to convince yourself it is. Real love protects your spirit. As he continued talking, I realized my son was not describing perfection. He was describing emotional maturity. And there is a huge difference between those two things. He said she did not need constant attention to feel valuable. She had her own emotional center, her own calmness, her own life. She did not create drama to feel desired. She did not punish silence. She did not make everything into conflict. Then he said something that honestly touched me more than I expected. He said, "Mum, when life becomes overwhelming, she somehow makes me feel human again." I looked down at my hands after hearing that because mothers understand the weight hidden inside sentences like that. The world often stops seeing successful men as human beings. They become symbols, machines, providers, problem solvers. But underneath all of that, they still need tenderness. They still need emotional warmth. They still need someone who sees the tired person beneath the pressure. And perhaps women understand this better than anyone, especially older women. Because by our age, we know life can become unbearably lonely even inside crowded rooms. We know people can admire you deeply without truly understanding you at all. I asked him whether she understood the reality of his life, the pressure, the criticism, the non-stop demands. Because loving a man like Elon is not simple. It requires emotional strength most people do not realize. He nodded slowly. Then he told me something I will never forget. He said this woman never tried to compete with his mission. She respected it without making it her entire identity. She encouraged him without worshipping him. She challenged him without humiliating him. And somehow, she made his complicated life feel emotionally softer. Dear woman, do you know how rare that balance is? Some people enter relationships trying to control each other. Others become emotionally dependent until the relationship collapses under pressure. But healthy love allows two people to breathe while still remaining deeply connected. I remember asking him the question every mother eventually asks. Do you trust her? He became quiet immediately, and honestly silence tells mothers everything sometimes. After a long pause, he finally answered, yes, and that scares me. That answer broke my heart in the gentlest way. Because trust is terrifying when someone has experienced disappointment before, especially for people who live highly public lives, where motives are constantly questioned. Opening your heart after emotional pain requires enormous courage. Have you ever noticed how some people become colder after heartbreak while others become softer? I think pain reveals character more than comfort ever does. And listening to my son that night, I realized he no longer wanted excitement that disappeared quickly. He wanted permanence, loyalty, emotional consistency, a woman whose love remained steady even when life became difficult. Then he looked directly at me and asked something unexpected. He said, Mum, do you think peaceful love is enough? Or do people always end up wanting chaos eventually? What a painful question. And maybe you have wondered that yourself before too. Because modern relationships often glorify emotional instability. People confuse toxic intensity with deep connection. But mature love is not built on emotional roller coasters. Mature love is built on trust, patience, emotional safety, and choosing each other repeatedly during ordinary days. I reached for his hand gently, and told him something I wish more people understood earlier in life. I told him the strongest relationships are usually the quietest ones, not because they lack passion, but because they lack unnecessary fear. You do not spend every day wondering if the other person still loves you. You do not constantly fight for reassurance. You are not emotionally performing all the time. You simply feel safe together. And dear woman, after everything I have witnessed in life, I truly believe emotional safety is one of the purest forms of love that exists. That night ended quietly. No dramatic conclusion. No perfect fairy tale moment. Just a mother sitting beside her son while he finally spoke honestly about the kind of woman his heart had been searching for all along. And as I watched him walk away afterward, I realized something beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Even the men who seem strongest to the world still dream about being loved gently.